Okay, we're taping this meeting because the clerk has not arrived yet. This is John McDonald, Chairman, Harbor Management Committee. It's 6 p.m., June 16th. We're in the mezzanine room. I'm going to call for a quorum. Okay, at present at the table is Mr. Falaguera, Mr. Harris, Mr. Meyer, Mr. McGee, Mr. Staub, Mr. Meinke. I'm going to seat Mr. Dannenhauer for Ms. Lewis so you can vote at this meeting.
Okay.
And welcome aboard Mr. Staub, who is a permanent member. He has been sworn in. Mr. Dannenhauer has been sworn in. Mr. Barnes is here. He's been sworn in. Mr. Barnes is recused because this is a matter of the 4 Mile River and he has interests in the marina on that river. Okay, let's begin. I'll call for the clerk's report, the approval of the minutes of June 8th, 2021. Are there any comments or corrections? Hearing none, I'll take a motion.
I move that the minutes be accepted as distributed.
Second.
Minutes, motion, RF, second, TM. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, approved. Okay. Thank you. Next order of business. Does anybody need an agenda? I have 2 spares. I have 3 spares.
Thank you.
Well, you have to share with them. Okay. My printer just exploded with all this paperwork, and
I'm still having trouble getting stuff coming out of Mary Ellen's distribution list.
it's been noted, and we're cognizant of that issue, and I'm double checking the official correspondence. Okay, let's start off with the 4 Mile River water depth and funding issues. Subpart A, update on any new information regarding water depths, marina operator owners, or commission members. Please let us know what you've seen or heard lately.
Still people getting stuck. It's just
People getting stuck.
Yeah, as of this morning, there was today's lowest tide. There was somebody who was stuck for an hour and a half, both directions.
Okay.
And that was a 17-foot center constant.
Where was something like that draw?
About a foot and a half.
Really? Just a foot and a half. Roughly what time of day was that?
That was noted by Mike Perez from the 4 Mile River. I was actually at work.
Was Mr. Perez, by the way, did you get a hold of him?
I did, yeah. I stopped there. He was unable to attend this evening, but he basically told me that and then told me, please help. That was pretty much just...
Okay, so he's still interested in...
Oh, yeah. He was, so basically, he's the only man there, so like he has to be there all the time. He's not even really allowed to leave. That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
But conditions exist.
I think it's important to note too, this morning's low tide was a third of a foot above the mean level.
True.
So
Okay.
we're still having issues, so right now we're about a third of a foot each day is above where it normally is. It's going to get better later on as the moon changes here, but
We're about mid-cycle, right?
so this is best case right now because the moon doesn't have as much of an effect.
Okay, that's interesting.
We were towing a 10 by 10 floating dock from the boat launch out to Point of Woods on the Seaview side, and we got
4 Mile River boat launch?
Yeah, and we got stuck coming out from the bridge
When was that?
this morning about 11:30.
Okay.
That was at 4 Mile, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
1:30 in the morning?
11:30.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's move on that. We've established that there's low water. I think just For everybody's reference, the tide chart book for your Eldridges on page 236 has an interesting dialogue about apogee and perigee moon, and that exacerbates the situation. I noticed that we had, that only happens at certain months, and it happened in May, and it's happening again in June. So it can happen that the alignment of the moon, full moon, and the perigee, which is the closest approach of the moon to the Earth, not the opposite, which is the apogee, when it's farthest away from the Earth. The perigee is when it has the most gravitational pull, and that will exacerbate
And we just had an eclipse.
attack.
So that's going to align things even further.
I highly recommend this book. It is very interesting reading. Incredible. Just some useful data. NOAA, on their website, puts out these wonderful charts about tide cycles. It goes to Mr. Staub's point about some of the tides are above and below the predictions, or the predictions vary from mean low water. There are very nice historical documentation in here about when the highest and lowest values were ever recorded at New London. Now, New London is our recording station, and we do not have recording stations at 4 Mile River or Saybrook J. So you have to go to the closest recording station to get these kind of data, actual data. And there are some numbers here. I was specifically looking for lows of close to a foot below normal tides. And one of those incidences happened on April 30th of this year. So this kind of data is available and is very useful. But that's not in contention here. We're not trying to make any points with that. It's just this kind of data, if you're interested, is out there. Okay. Public comment. Seeing there's no people from the public, we'll move on. Thank you. Update on dredging funding. Let me find my paper here. Since our past meeting on June 8th, I've contacted and been in contact with the Connecticut Port Authority not approximately, 3 times, either by voice, email, or other means, meaning text. I was expecting some better news at the moment, but I got this message from them this afternoon, so it's fresh, not old data. I was written by Mr. Salvatore to say that any actions by this committee would qualify for reimbursement if presented with tasks and invoices after there is an approval of this as a project by the Connecticut Port Authority. They're in a reorganization at the Port Authority, and there is still questions of the balance of funds for prior projects. The Connecticut Port Authority, CPA, has to go through another formal notice of 30 days and a board approval for institution of a new set of policies and procedures to grant and loan funds. The CPA did, however, approve at their board meeting their ship grant policy and procedures at a recent board meeting this week. Part of that was that aforementioned reimbursement policy. CPA is trying to get things in place so they can assist the smaller project community. There was an acknowledgement on their part that the 4 Mile River is a non-federal waterway, meaning the Connecticut is a federal waterway 4 mile is a non-federal waterway, would fall under the SHIP grant program and funding when the funding is made available. So that's the latest update. The good news there is it's not a firm no. They're not going to do it. The bad news is it's not a yes. They can't do it.
I'm sorry to interrupt, so I just want to comprehend what you're telling me.
Yeah.
They're saying that this is going to fall under a SHIP grant. Is that what they're trying to lean this project towards, as opposed to the other funding was not a SHIP grant? It was the legacy funds, right? So I know understand the things. I'm just.
No, I read two different things here. I read they're seeking our balance of funds,
Okay, that's okay.
and I think they're saying later on,
Yes, for
going
initiative.
forward,
Yep.
you know, there's two different issues there.
Yep.
That this is a SHIP type of project.
Project.
Whether it's SHIP 2, which has gone by, or SHIP 3, which is to come,
Yep.
SHIP 3 has not been issued.
Correct.
So,
The bad news is the amount of time it takes them to solicit applications for the SHIP, the round of SHIP grants, which would be SHIP 3, because SHIP 2 was 2 years ago that expired. And then after they got the applications, they review them and, you know, blah, 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 and go after the grant money in order to award grants. So it's a lengthy process. It falls under SHIP, so you can't imagine it being less than 6 months.
Hey Steve, the last time when you guys, you and Ned did the funding for the dredging over there, that wasn't a SHIP grant. They weren't existing then.
No, that was not a SHIP grant. Connecticut Port Authority didn't exist.
that's correct.
It was under the Department of Transportation.
CDOT.
Yeah.
And Joe Salvatore, who is now, they transferred him over to CTA from DOT.
So the balance of the
was
money,
involved in that.
the balance of the money that was left over from that dredging is not SHIP grant money.
No, it is not.
So wouldn't we be eligible for that without all the?
Yeah, strings attached with the SHIP.
In the logical world, yes.
It's the state can do what they want.
So that's what we got to tackle is their Office of Policy and Management. Where who knows somebody up there?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. We only know what we know. We haven't gone to the policy of Office of Policy Management. That has not been done. We are looking towards the Connecticut Port Authority to come through for us.
Wouldn't it make sense to get a hold of Joe Salvatore because he preempted the SHIP grants, and maybe to appeal to him as far as what was left over in the fund, and let him know that we have an emergency here.
Harry, that memo I just read you, that was Joe Salvatore.
Oh, okay. So he's.
We've been in touch with Joe Salvatore.
Steve, that's okay. Hold on. Let me explain it.
Sorry.
That's it. That was Joe. I've been in communication with Joe Salvatore at the Connecticut Port Authority.
Okay.
He's telling us it was a CDOT program. Now it's a SHIP program to go forward to get new money. He said he's looking into getting back the balance of funds.
Yeah, you did say that.
Okay, so that's where we're at.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Moving on.
John, just a clarification, I think you opened your statement with something about reimbursement.
Yeah.
Is that to the point of us paying for example, that survey that's needed to start the whole ball rolling? And
That's
they said
exactly.
that would be eligible, theoretically, to be reimbursed. Is that what?
If the whole project is approved, it sounds like we get reimbursed. If it's not, we don't.
Right.
That's the way I read it. Okay. I
That's
was wondering
that's the crux
Yeah.
of it. Yes, we'll get reimbursed if they set up a project for us. If we don't set up us a project, if this continued not stalemate or whatever is going on, inability to move and grant funds, we're going to have to carry whatever we approve is work on our own ticket until such time as there's a project made where we can submit invoices and tickets to get reimbursed. So we have to be very careful
Risk, yeah.
not to exceed our capabilities. Okay.
In the other, the former dredging project, we did have a little of that, some expenses before the money actually came through.
Okay.
And just as you said, you submit the invoices.
Well, the reason we're approaching it like that, of course, is so we don't have a longer time delay.
Right.
If we waited another month, maybe 60 days, for Connecticut Port Authority to actually send us a letter of commitment, you've lost 60 days in the process. So I think we're moving ahead, because we discussed it at the last meeting, that we could move ahead and make some progress on our own. Okay. I want to move on next to point 4, is the 4 Mile River redredging project initiations. We've had many discussions. We've heard from Mike Barnes about emergency dredge procedures being available and expedient. We did, unsolicited, get a memo from the DEP saying that is not, this situation does not qualify as an emergency. I forwarded that to everybody around the table here. All the members got it. You've read it for yourself. I think, in my mind, I'm satisfied that emergency procedure is not available to us, and then we should use this certificate of permission procedure as was outlined by the DEP.
If I may make a comment on that, and this is just my perspective. So, everything up at this office is up for interpretation. Just hear me out. The reason I was asserting the emergency and trying to put it under the emergency authorization is that two-tiered. From a funding standpoint, if it's an emergency, it gives it more precedence. So if our approach was that the fire department, the letter that we have from the fire department is they can't get access out on their dinghies, like at a reasonable time. If there's an emergency, the parking lot's in Lifestar approved landing zone, right? So Sue Bailey's interpretation of the regulation is it's not an unforeseen problem that's preventing this emergency situation, and that it's not causing undue health to someone or something like that, right? Well, from a funding standpoint, if we're trying to assert ourselves to the Port Authority, I feel that taking the emergency route, even though it might not happen this season, like similar to the COP, or this, if we still put the urgency behind it, I feel that our funding has more meat to grab at. If we don't put it under emergency authorization, or even if it's not going to fall under the criteria of emergency authorization, however, we still assert it to be an emergency, that we can claim that money based on the fire department not being able to get up. Basically, they're not going to do it for 2 residential marinas and a state launch, right? We need another reason why then to support an actual emergency. And the letter from the fire department is our bite, if we have any ability to have a bite in this regulation interpretation. Because you have to understand, Sue Bailey is very environmentally, she would rather not a marina exist. And I know that personally because I've worked with her closely for years and years. And where I'm going with this is ultimately it relies up to the commissioner and the deputy commissioner to decide whether it's an emergency or not. So if we can get I've noticed that I've gotten no from DEP several times on different applications. Every time I've had to go around another way to make sure that they said yes and see it from a different perspective. I feel that if we're able to still call it an emergency from the trade or the Port Authority Association, or us saying that it's an emergency and the fire department backing you up, gives that ability for that funding maybe to come a little bit faster, as opposed to if we didn't assert that, calling it an emergency. I understand we can't maybe get it under the emergency authorization. It still might need to go under a COP, but if we don't claim it still to be an emergency that has to be dealt with, I feel like our funding doesn't have the ability to get to us potentially. I don't know if anyone has any comments or thoughts on that.
And we would figure that would, the necessity for that, you would have to present something. In other words, you have the fire department's letter.
Correct.
But she says, well, basically there are other areas that are just as convenient.
Yeah, but
how do you
argue that?
Yeah.
How do you basically, you just say, well, look it's in the letter. It says they need this location. It's not up for Sue Bailey to determine what the best landing zone for a Lifestar helicopter is going to be. She can't just assume that because there's other places to go, that that's not the most appropriate spot. If you follow me.
Yeah, I follow.
It's up for interpretation. So, because I know her and I know the way she's interpreting it, that's the way she sees it. But it's ultimately not up to Sue Bailey. It's up to the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, and making them understand that the problem exists and recognizing that it's a real problem, so it meets certain criteria. So it's two prongs. We need the funding, but we also need the permit, right? But if we say it's an emergency, we have a better chance of getting the funding unless we don't say it.
Mike, I've heard you, and the committee's heard you.
Well, we're just discussing.
No, I'm discussing. I'm cutting that discussion off because you made that same discussion last time.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything.
And we heard the discussion. We heard the discussion.
So let's discuss it.
No, the committee here has to vote whether or not we're going to do the co-op procedure or the emergency procedure. Hold it. I want to get Mike. Mike,
when you're ready.
Pardon? I'll call on you when we're ready. Okay. Your argument is circular in nature and it's self-serving.
No, it's not.
It is. It is. Because any emergency, no matter where, you can make an argument that somebody can't get to an emergency, whether a tree's across the road or the sandbars out there. Being on the water in itself can be any situation in the water can become an emergency.
What does that have to do with
Well, what it has to do with if there was an emergency off the end of 4 Mile River Road at low water, you would get out of your boat and you'd walk ashore.
Assuming that you can walk.
Yeah, and assuming that the fire department has all the resources and knowledge and criteria, they've done rescues on ice, rescues in shallow water, and you take a paddleboard out there and you put somebody on a paddleboard, don't you? You're just making an argument.
I'm not making an argument. You're generalizing it too much.
Well, you're being too specific. That you could make any argument you want
I have
about
to be
a
specific.
All right.
I have to be specific because that's the only bite that we have. That's the only thing that we have to our.
Well, that's the crux of it. It's up to the committee if we want to go the emergency route or the COP route.
So that's this conversation.
Yeah, so I think if the fire department is claiming this is an emergency, they are the professionals that need to serve the town in a professional manner in a rescue mission. If they were saying that this is a hazard or prevents them from saving lives, it's not up to us. I don't know how to save a life. I don't know how to rescue missions. It's up to the fire department who wrote the letter to determine if it's emergent. It's not up to Sue Bailey, who is an environmental scientist. It's up to medical professionals, the first responders, to make that decision.
Well,
isn't it?
the condition exists today, Chris. This
Absolutely.
condition, and we're not going to change it in the next year.
Correct.
So you're saying an emergency exists, and how is an emergency permit going to go forward any faster than a COP permit?
Yeah, I'm not even discussing that standpoint. I'm just discussing that
I haven't got the letter.
the first responders are the ones that are saying that this is an emergency situation.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen the letter.
I read it to you all and I submitted it to this clerk in the record.
No, it was not submitted. I don't know. I didn't get a copy of it. I don't think she got a copy of it.
It's also, if I may, John, it's also one letter from Old Lyme Fire Department.
Okay.
The other side of the river is East Lyme. So, I mean, where's their skin in the game, so to speak? You know,
Well, they don't use East Line.
you don't know who the voter is out there. They could be from.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Ross.
Mike's argument is valid to a point, as is Sue Bailey's. As you said, Mike, open to interpretation.
Correct.
You're interpreting it one way, and you have some arguments to back up your assertion, just as she does.
For sure.
I'm sure there's data available as to how many times the fire department has had to use a medevac helicopter there. The other point is just a procedural thing, and I think we need to correct it. At the beginning of the meeting, you said that Mike was recused.
From voting, not discussing.
No, when you're recused, you cannot discuss. I think that needs to be changed to not recuse him. He needs not to be recused. so that he can speak.
Well,
If he's recused, he cannot technically.
That's not my
If you're
interpretation.
recused, look at Robert's Rules of Order. If you're recused, you should be leaving the room. And I'm not saying that that's what we should do. I'm saying that's what we shouldn't do. So it's a procedural thing.
Well-
Because virtually everything you said, if you're recused, is off the record.
No, well, let me clarify that with you. But if I've made a mistake on the rules, I apologize for that. But as far as Mike's position, he was able to participate in the meeting through dialogue. He wasn't able to make motions, second motions, and vote.
Okay, that's a different
That's
appropriate.
that's where we're at with Harry.
In the permitting world, the COP was introduced to expedite certain things that needed to be permitted. Wouldn't what he's saying and us going the route of the COP would almost be parallel? So why don't we go the route of the COP? Because
Well, let me put it. Thank you, Harry. That was an excellent point.
I'm okay with the COP. I'm not saying that we don't go the COP route. I'm specifically saying that we still have to assert that it's an emergency. Just so
time out, Mike. They've already denied you
Listen,
that it's emergency.
just because one lady says no doesn't mean that that's the way it is. I can assure you of that.
Sue Bailey happens to have a lot of pull.
I'm very well.
Okay, so listen to reason.
So I'm not trying to say I need the emergency for the permit to go through, Harry. I'm saying I need the emergency to help assort the necessity to get the funds. Because if it's an emergency, the fire department needs these funds, we're going to stand up better than we would if we were just there asking for the funds that can go somewhere else that's not an emergency.
Yeah, but they're still going to debate you on the status of emergency. As John said, it's all about interpretation.
We're not following.
Yeah, if we put it in the COP that it is an emergency, does that hinder us at all? Will they say, no, it's not an emergency, you're not getting approval, and they're saying, yeah, we'll approve it, but it doesn't matter if it's an emergency or not for us. So is there any negative to putting it in there?
No, a COP cuts down on the red tape and the duration of how long it takes to get a permit.
Right, but I think what we're saying is the permit would be a COP permit.
Yes, I'm agreeing with that.
With the information attached to that COP. And by the way, here's a letter from the fire department saying that this could be conceived as an emergent situation because of the lower deck.
Let's get one.
But they're still not going to shortcut.
I'm not looking for a shortcut.
They're still not going to shortcut the procedure.
No.
So whether it's an emergency or not, the steps that John's outlined in that the tasks to be done have to be done. So you can call it emergency, not call it emergency. You still have to go through those steps.
I'm not arguing that.
Yeah, so
You're misunderstanding. I'm arguing that the commission still needs to say it's an emergency to the Port Authority, so that way the funds look that much more important. To me, if you stand out more asking for money if it's an emergency.
I say urgency rather than
Okay, that's if you want to use that word.
I disagree. It's an emergency. I totally disagree.
I understand you.
I
Okay.
totally disagree. Anything
fine.
you can construe on the water as an emergency. We have plenty of other resources, emergency response resources. There's alternatives. The point that the DEP was making that normal sedimentation of waters, sandbars, water, how could they possibly agree that's an emergency when that precedent would go statewide and they would say every sandbar that appeared anywhere is an emergency? It's not.
If the fire department asking for it, then maybe it would be.
Well, the Connecticut Port Authority wouldn't agree with an emergency dialogue. They would be besieged by emergency requests. Your path is not sustainable.
You keep saying my path. I've already agreed with you guys that we have to go to the COP. I understand and I
But
comprehend.
you're urging this committee to declare it emergency.
I'm not.
Well, you are.
Yeah. What, it doesn't hurt yet.
That's your comment. That's your comment. I'm going to cut it off there. Mr. Falguera.
First of all, give you a little background. In my former life, I was in charge of emergency preparedness chairman of the Emergency Preparedness Readiness Committee for all the hospitals in the state of Connecticut, bar none, all of them. If this is not an immediate threat to life, nobody, all the way up to the governor, is not going to call it an emergency. We had situations with mass casualties where 2, 3, 4 hospitals were overrun and the governor refused to call it an emergency. You think a sandbar is going to change that? A sandbar is just going to be a grain of sand in the wind. Number 2, where Lifestar is concerned, you can't even bring Lifestar into the conversation. I was the Lifestar coordinator for St. Francis Hospital. Lifestar has significant landing zones. The one for this region is in Niantic. They can and do land in areas where they are needed. If there is ever a situation south of the railroad bridge, as was brought up before, rescuers could get there in numerous ways and bring victims to anywhere east or west of that river. Point is, you would have to make a very, very significant case and prove immediate, that's the word, threat to life. Not a possible threat to life, but immediate threat to life.
I'm not arguing with that.
Trust me, I've been through this numerous times.
Okay. Discussion of timeline. The timeline on this project is uncertain. If a COP permit was pursued on our part, it would be valid up to 5 years, depending on funding for the second and third phases. In my estimation, the project is somewhere between 1 and 5 years away, depending on that definition, where we'd have to restart again and get another permit.
Do they, for COP, would they honor some of the previous tests and/or engineering that was done, or does it all have to be done from scratch?
They can refer to and will research the previous permit, and that will help cut down on some of the demands of the paperwork, and it could speed up the process.
The answer to that question is absolutely yes.
Okay, project initiation. Recommend redredging, motion and vote. I've circulated this afternoon. If you didn't get it, I understand, because it's just at the last minute. An outline of tasks that are part of redredging process. And does everybody get that letter, or is there need to? You got it? Does anybody need it?
RFP outline of tasks.
I'll take a copy if you
I'll share with Terry.
Okay, so you share with Harry. Okay, and I also took the liberty. I wrote out some sample motions for tonight to get the wording right and to get an alignment. These are suggestions. I'm going to pass them out on both sides. In my printer, Sloan, you and Steve share.
Maybe not actually. Thank you.
I gave them all away.
Yeah, I gave them all away. I was printing them and my printer exploded. It really did. Literally left the earth. Okay, we're on number 4C, project initiation, recommendation, redredging, motion, vote. The reason for this motion is to formally undertake a navigable water survey leading to the goal of redredging 4 Mile River, and to make recommendations to the town of Lowell Line towards that goal. We haven't officially done that yet at last meeting, so this is the first and foremost, first motion in an order of motions to get the ball rolling.
I think that motion ought to include a dollar amount and also statements to the effect that upon funding, if funding is received for the project, that it's reimbursed.
That comes later on, Steve.
Oh, it's later on.
Yeah, we get to that. This is just the statement of project initiation. Call for discussion. Call for a motion.
Move.
Seconded.
Approved. Sure.
Okay, well, let me get this down. 4C. RF. Yeah, Mike McGee. Okay, the motion is the HMC moves to undertake and begin a navigable waterway study to gather information with the goal leading to redredging of the 4 Mile River and to make recommendations to the town of Oline towards that goal. All in favor?
Aye.
Who's there opposed? I take it everybody who is voted? Okay. Except Mr. Barnes? Okay. All in favor. Okay, 4D. Project permitting, COP, motion and vote. The project permitting is the HMC considering the advice from Connecticut DEP and other information offered by the United States Army Corps of Engineers will proceed with the project goal of redredging the 4 Mile River following the certificate of permission permit process.
I think you may need to add south of the railroad bridge or something to find that, rather than the whole river.
I didn't define that because
You don't know the exact.
no, it leaves the scope actually from the marinas to the sound within the scope of the study.
Okay.
Well, it'd be smart to, like you are doing, Johnny, it's a good idea, because let's say 4 years you get this permit issued and there's other issues with inside the river, you guys already have a valid permit to make repairs without having to go back out and reformulate the whole plan.
Well, we're talking stem to stern. We're talking top to bottom.
Basically, reauthorization of the previous, your COP would only be applicable to the previous permit. If it's going to be anything outside of the previous permit, it's no longer a COP, it becomes a new structure spill and dredge permit.
So does the hydrographic study do the entire river then? Okay.
Yes, it does all set.
All right.
Sorry to ask a question. Where is the boundary?
Right,
where it
here's the
stops
map.
being the river
Here's the map.
and starts being the center?
Here's actually the whole as-built map. So it's really like this.
I'm happy with that. You don't have to-
No, but I'm just so you can see it in its entirety.
I thought
Well, the intent of that second motion was to keep the scope the same as the original studies.
Okay.
And also, if, like Mike said, if something goes wrong and we don't know what's going to happen a year from now or 2 years from now, there is latitude to continue with the scope of the entire project.
Will a hydrographic study be done on the entire river, or
Yes.
then that 5,500?
That's for the whole river.
That was for the whole.
That was for the whole river.
Good.
And I just want to point out, so now that we're having this discussion, this is a good time to talk about it, because, so if let's just say this, we know this isn't going to happen this year, or it's going to take a long period of time. If we're going to be meeting a lot of the criteria of a new structure spill and dredge permit, like, so for instance, let's say we're moving forward with this dredging of this area out here, right? But it's going to be a COP that authorizes the entire river to be maintained or repaired, okay? The COP, even though you're not going to do the work up here, that same COP is going to allow you to do the work out in the river, or out in the sound, okay? Because we are in this position so soon after a recent dredge project, I'm wondering if we're, a new structure spill and dredge permit generally takes 12 to 18 months, could be up to 24 months to get a full permit, as opposed to the COP generally has a 60 to 90 day turnaround. If we're going to spend the money, do we spend the money and modify this to be deeper? So if they are dredging, we have the flexibility to go deeper, so you're going to get longer spans of time between the dredge cycles. So like this allows you to go to -3 with a 1 foot over dredge. If you go to, let's say, the next permit authorized an elevation of 6 below.
Yeah, that question has actually been raised. Is the depth
Enough.
enough? One of the issues, of course, is that will it fill back in, and how fast will it fill back in?
Correct. It's taken about 4 years, 4 or 5 years to fill back.
It was never dredged before, but now it's filled back in. So
In a narrow waterway, the bigger you deep, the deeper you dig, the faster the banks are going to fall into it. If you dig it 6 feet, it's going to be to 3 feet a lot quicker than if you dig it to 3 feet. It'll fill in more slowly.
let me just address one thing, because there was some concern about that, both pro and con. I mean, you can dig deeper. It could fill in faster. If you dig deeper, you do not always have the latitude under a cup. For tonight's purposes, we can go the COP route. There's nothing to prevent at the natural stopping point of what we're going to try to achieve tonight, which is phase 1 hydrographic study and conceptual plan submission, that during the stopping point of a project, let me just make it very clear, there is a point at which your engineer who does your hydrographic survey develops your conceptual plan. And the conceptual plan is reviewed with us in the town. Then that conceptual plan moves on for its first consultation with the agencies in concert. There could be a point at that conceptual plan whether to go forward with the COP or a full permit. But I don't think it's wise for us to go full permit when we're looking to, and we may not have the money for the full permit route. So it's not that we couldn't change it. It's just that it's if we start that process, we're really looking for a longer time frame, a whole lot more money, and the money aspect, frankly, concerns me that just kind of growing a project to where the money can't keep up, because I think the money will always be tight. Mr. Farmer.
I think you're 100% right. When you look at the plan that is on the table and I have on my screen here, looking at the bridge south to the sound where the problem exists is a significant area. If we did a survey that included the areas north of the bridge, which then would beget a feasibility study and maybe engineering plan that would include that, definitely, the cost estimates that we're going to get for the dredging, taking into consideration the fact that they're going to have to float barges under the bridge, is going to be significantly more than the money, hopefully, we can recoup from what was left over from the last grant. Short of that happening, we would be faced with having to apply for another grant. And you could verify how long that takes. And the possibility of getting another grant in this environment could be slim to none.
Harry, you're next.
I think one of the things that we have overlooked is the fact that the infill of that area is due to the fact that bridge exists.
Correct.
Maybe we should contact Amtrak
Let them talk.
as an extension of the federal government, because that's created the problem.
100% agree with you on that.
Okay, and listen, if we contact them, they're going to have to pay attention because they're going to be building the bridge across the river. So they're going to be around here.
How many lifetimes do you have?
See, but with that mindset, you'll never get anything changed different.
That's right.
Okay, we're not going to have a back and forth. Mr. Meyer?
I have a question, possibly related to the concept of putting the project together with the scope of the whole river versus south of the bridge. And maybe I just don't know enough about it, but Is it a possibility that the spoils from north of the bridge would require different treatment than the spoils from south of the bridge?
Exactly.
So that could, almost to your point, Bob, trip us up in terms of funding as well. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
I mean, I already have serious doubts whether the $260,000 that's left is going to cover this.
Go ahead,
If
Steve.
you include above the bridge, definitely not, because the mobility costs
Yeah, for sure.
for above the bridge, if I recall correctly, were about double what they were in the Black Hole River.
Okay, that's true. There. Chris.
Those marinas been there since when?
1960.
1960.
1959.
And how often have we had to dredge that river historically? Was this the first time we ever did it?
The South Line Marina was dredged in 1960. That was the first marina on the river. And then in 1963, Stanhope's Boatyard, which is now the 4 Mile River, was dug out of the salt marsh. And they dug out in 1963, they dug a channel 400 feet long by 50 foot wide. That was the first designated permitted dredge on the river in 1963.
The whole river was never dredged.
So it's
Just the marina area.
the extension of the dredging stopped at my marina, and then from there it was the natural title creek out the rest of the way.
Gotcha. So the marinas were dredged, but this dredge we did 4-ish years ago was the first time it was ever dredged from the marina out to the sound. But it was fine for 40 some odd years, and now all of a sudden it's
not.
It's not. Okay.
I don't think it was fine. It's just that people were used to it, and they just didn't go in and out at the really low tides.
Gotcha.
But during that time period, there was also repairs done to the bridge. And I don't think that that has helped the situation.
Well, we didn't get the longevity out of the last dredge that we had hoped for.
That's a good point. Based on the as-built survey from right after they were done, even on their as-built, they're showing 2 feet, 2.5, 2.3, 2.7, like right in the area outside the bridge. This was done right after they were done dredging, so it means they never
got to the 4 feet.
It never ever got to the 3 feet plus the 1. I mean, you can look right here, the hydrographic numbers here. There is places that is 3 feet, but here I am 700 feet out, and I still have elevation 2.5.
But they had said they used vacuum dredging and it was too hard.
They use the long reach excavator with a clamshell bucket on a barge. I watched the whole entire thing.
I saw that on the Black Hole. I didn't see
It is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back on track.
Well, that is on.
I know it's on track, Mike, but
Well, so it's important to note that it wasn't done properly the first time. So if we're going to do it, we might as well make sure we're doing it right.
Was there a problem that they couldn't?
Why couldn't they do it?
Like,
why did
could
they
it
get
be,
paid?
could it be
Well,
ledge underneath?
that's a good question.
May I see that?
Yeah.
Because after the dredging was completed, we went out and checked the depths to see that it was conformed to what we contracted for, and it did.
That's yes,
Oh, I can't read this.
No, so I will tell you the majority of the river did meet the criteria. The area that did not is immediately underneath the bridge and within 400 feet out.
Yeah, I think the problem with that bridge is it fills in a heartbeat.
Well,
Okay.
But I know they
that's
checked.
not where your guys are getting stuck, right?
No,
They're
that's
not getting stuck under the bridge, they're getting stuck outside.
correct.
There's plenty of water under the bridge.
Yes, under the bridge is not the problem. It's 5 feet out of the bridge.
Yeah. Okay, so the motion that was read, it was not, well, but I'll say it again. The HMC, considering the advice of Connecticut DEP and other information offered by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, will proceed with the project goal of redredging 4 Mile River following the certificate of permission permit process. Motion?
So moved.
I think that's a good motion. I'll second.
You go second?
Second.
No, I got Mikey on that. Okay, this is, just to be clear, this is opposite to or not including emergency dredging or permit at this time. We could change course if we had to. but this is the COP process. Okay. Third,
We need to vote on it.
yes, we do. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, all in favor. So noted. Okay, the project RFP. The project we did previous to this, the 2016 project, had a request for proposals where you hire a engineer, certified engineer, and that engineer, on behalf of the town, goes through the permitting process, developing data, engineering data, and it also does the elements that are listed on this list of activities, 3 phases of activities called feasibility, dredging design, and regulatory permitting. So that's what an RFP does. The motion here is the HMC on behalf of the town of Oldlyme, who is the issuing authority, may proceed to prepare, this is only to prepare an RFP for engineering services as part of the redredging of the 4 Mile River. The RFP scope will generally be defined as a navigable water study. Those are the exact words that were used before in 2016, comprised of a 3-phased approach of a feasibility study, a design study, which is engineering, and permitting. Okay.
John, I think you had mentioned that I think the previous RFP that we took could very likely be used with minor modification. So there wouldn't be a cost to hire anybody to do that, to draw up that RFP.
That's in motion number 5, Steve. I'll address that. This RFP just says that we're going to do this. We're going to issue one. This says that the committee here is going to develop an RFP and hand it to the town fathers. Specifically, Mr. Griswold has to issue it for a request for bids on behalf of the town. We can't. We don't go out to bid on this. The town does.
There was some dialogue with Coastline that I had that if there's the ability, now I'm just speaking out loud so you can hear me out. If this is an extension of the previous project, would this be considered an extension of the previous project, or is this considered a new project?
I think that contract with Coastline is closed. I haven't seen the contract documents, but the last survey that was done, Steve, was when by Coastline?
2000.
It was at the completion of the project.
So we haven't had a contract with them since 2016.
It was not an open-ended contract.
Yeah, no, I understand that. That was just the dialogue with the owner of the company. So he's saying speak to the purchasing agent of the town. Maybe they can consider that to be still part of that project, so it doesn't have to go out for an RFP.
No, that it would have to go for an RFP.
I don't know if it makes sense.
You'd have to go out to bid with it. You can't.
Forward.
spend that kind of money
But this
without
committee is
bidding.
just deciding that that's what we want to do, is follow the approach that we followed in 2016.
You have to see.
That's correct. Thank you for reading that.
So I don't know, on the approach for 2016, do we need a feasibility study to be part of that? I don't know if that's the same thing. Like if you're requesting the RFP, it's going to sound more detailed if there's a feasibility study attached to it.
Yes. Like the co-op process has, as part of it, the first part of the co-op process is the feasibility study, and it encompasses those steps. Now, if you're asking if some of those steps, based on previous research and previous knowledge, can be expedited, that's a possibility, yes. But all these steps on feasibility phase get us to that all-important point of a conceptual plan. And the conceptual plan developed by the engineer has to be processed through this committee for an agreement with their concept of what they want to do, and then it has to be discussed with the regulatory agencies. And that's a stopping point for us, because That's where we kind of know what we want to do and what we can afford to do, and with whatever funding that we may come along with in the meantime. You need to marry the conceptual plan with whatever your funding plan is. I just don't see how you can't. One has to work with the other. If we came up with a concept that you have to dredge to 12 feet and the whole thing all the way out to the sound, I mean, it's not going to be affordable.
Makes sense.
So that's the motion. We have a second.
Second.
No, excuse me. I mean,
I think we need to call number 3, right?
no, then we have to call for a motion. I mean,
I would like to call for a motion on number 3 as written.
number 3 is written. Okay, so that is confused between E and 3 here. Okay, this is 4E. Tom Meyer is going to make the motion that the motion is as written in this item number 3. Second?
Second.
Any more discussion on that? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, all in favor. Okay, 4F. Hydrographic survey and report. HMC commitment to fund and cap expense. Motion and vote. When we talk about, we did last meeting, hydrographic survey and report, I want to be clear that we use those terms in general sense, but from our to make progress sense, we have to follow the steps, at least the steps in 1 through 8. And I'll read those steps off. So, in the RFP, we'd be asking our engineer to assemble existing background information, conduct a certified hydrographic survey and consultation meeting with the town after they did the survey. The engineer would determine navigational channel depths and widths, basically interpret the maps, charts, identify critical coastal resources and conditions. That word resources means things like fish, shellfish, natural contours, and plant and animal conditions. That was done before 2016 dredging, but that is part of a feasibility conceptual plan. They would prepare the conceptual channel plan and dredge volume computations. They would identify feasible dredging methods, equipment, prepare a cost estimate, prepare a draft for us at the town, and a final summary after they got our inputs, and a final summary report. And they would have to review the draft with the town and submit the summary to the DEP and the Army Corps. Then they would have to review the summary report again with the regulatory agencies to reach an agreement on a conceptual plan. So that's what this item number 4 is. This is what that undertaking is.
John, question.
Yes.
Where does timing come into the mix, if at all, at this point?
It's hard to say, Tom. This motion for item number 4 it says, we've already approved in our last motion, number 3, that we're going to undertake a full RFP to understand feasibility, design, and engineering. Our request for proposals. Those proposals will come into the town with all 3 of those items: the feasibility, the design, and the engineering proposals. They're just proposals. They haven't done any work. and they will give us their cost estimate, what those phases cost, or what they're. So we're trying to make the decision of one contractor, engineering contractor, to hire. Number 4 is different. What this says, in so many words, is the Harbor Management Commission is going to fund, or intends to fund. We haven't committed to fund. We're committing to and intending to fund the first phase of the project.
1 through 8.
1 through 8, feasibility through conceptual plan. We are not funding design and permitting. Now, as I read the original documentation from the past dredging, that's exactly what happened, Steve. With you and Mr. Farnham at the helm of that project, the town was not committed to the dredging plan, design or engineering scope, or permitting until the feasibility study was done and approved by the agencies.
And we had when we put it out to bid, we chose the contract.
And you chose the contract. So again, I don't want to be always repeating myself, but item number 4 is the phase 1 feasibility hydrographic survey conceptual plan. The HMC and the town will review the RFP proposals. These are just the proposals. These are not contracts. Prior to the award of contract, the HMC may, if necessary, make a commitment by a vote at that time to fund the first phase feasibility. It is not the intention of the HMC to fund phase 2 or 3 with HMC funding. I don't think we don't have anywhere near the right amount of funds for that.
And just so I'm clear, that would be the hydrographic survey as well as a related fee for the feasibility, finish of the feasibility study.
The hydrographic survey doesn't do us much good until we get a conceptual plan of what needs to be done.
So, if I may make a comment.
Sure.
The hydrographic survey would be utilized to determine volumes that need to be removed. Right? So, what I hear, obviously, is a lot of dollar signs in all these different phases, right? Because it's expensive to do all these things and hire all these engineers. The plan or the design, in essence, that's done already. Like that's, as far as when I say it's done, what's not done is the amount of material determined to figure out what needs to be removed, but someone's already paid to have the plan done. So a COP, the certificate of permission, is a modification of an existing permit. So we're not creating anything new. We're going to try to reuse what we have as far as the COP permit process, right? We're reusing all the stuff that Coastline's already been paid for. The only thing we're not reusing is the hydrographic survey that we're going to have to pay for a new one, and any biometric survey based on the shellfish. Those 2 studies are what going to be needed to be implemented with the previous package of materials we've already paid for. Does that make sense, if I'm saying that correct?
But that's what the RFP is going to say. You're going to rely on whatever. That's why this is a COP. The engineering firm has to know that there are pre-existing materials that don't have to be duplicated.
Yeah.
You know,
that's I'm just making sure that
number 1. You put it at number 1. Assemble existing background information.
Correct. So what I'm clarifying is I don't know if any other people knew there was a difference between the 2.
I don't know. I feel that if we asked for a hydrographic, like we were kicking around that we'll have a hydrographic survey. Well, hydrographic survey to me is like ordering off the menu a la carte. You know, I'll have a steak in the center, but you don't get the benefit of getting yourself to that all-critical part of the conceptual plan. And I think we need to understand that we need a new conceptual plan based upon whatever they find out there.
Correct, but you're basing your conceptual plan off the hydrographic, right?
To a large extent, yes.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you. I'm not arguing with you. I'm trying to clarify and understand. So I can feel a little frustration by me asking questions. I'm just trying to understand.
Well, your comment may be that we could do it cheaper somehow.
Yeah, substantially.
who would do that engineering work?
So again, that's what I was trying to explain. If you look at the stamp on the drawings, Coastline Consulting is not a licensed engineer, right? They're coastal consultants, okay? And they farm out their engineering to be stamped by someone else that reviews them. I'm not saying that they're the right person, the wrong person. They're great at what they do. I've hired them. I've spent tons of money with them. They're good at what they do. What I'm saying is there might be a way to minimize some of these costs if we have the ability to do so. I'm trying to save money. If I'm sure you guys would want to too, right? Because it's hard to spend all these money, especially when it takes so long to build that fund, right? I don't know what I'm
Okay, so we hire a consultant for phase 1. Then we go back out and hire a different consultant for phase 2 and a different consultant for phase 3.
No, not at all.
I don't understand what you just said, Mike. I really don't.
So, Mike, are you saying that we go get the hydrographic survey, and then instead of having Coastline or whoever make this plan here we talked about, this conceptual plan, you're saying have the engineering company that stamped it go have it, but then you're cutting out the middleman. Is that what you're saying?
Isn't that old plan essentially a conceptual study for
Yes,
new activity?
yes, that's what I'm getting at.
It's the same thing.
It's a duplicate. We don't need it. Everything's been, and John's right. We're going to utilize the information, just as Steve Ross said, we're going to utilize the old information, but we're almost putting in too much, and maybe we're not. Maybe I'm overanalyzing it or underanalyzing it.
Coastline is like a general contractor, and he subs out different phases of the work that he actually won the bid.
They did some themselves.
Correct. They do.
Subbed out some.
They do all the CAD work. They do the survey work. They just don't stamp the drawings because they're not licensed engineers. So.
It was their boat that did the hydrographic survey.
Correct. So they compile all the data. They're the assembler of the information, like he said, a general contractor. What I'm saying is like the conceptual plan has already been paid for. The only thing that needs to be changed is the numbers of the volume of material.
I'm not positive that there might not be something that's changed.
I agree.
But as far as what? The channel is the channel. That's the channel they're going to... The COP only allows you to stay within the footprint of... It's a COP. It has to be within the compounds of the original permit. So you're not making any changes to anything at all. It has to be a COP under a maintenance strategy.
Right, but they may request new changes.
They can't, because then it would be a COP. It'd be any structure still in dredge permit.
Sorry.
So what is where's the money to be saved? I don't understand it. Having gone through the process, I don't care who stamps the drawings.
Yeah, exactly. The money to be saved is you've already paid for all the data.
The cost to stamp the drawings is not relevant.
I'm not saying the cost.
Or significant. So why bring it up?
You're missing my point.
I am.
Okay, so let me spell it out again. The scope of work can't be outside of what this original permit was written for.
We don't intend it to be.
So you're saying the concept, no matter what we find, is going to be the same.
When I say we find, the only thing that's changed is there might be some seagrass. That's the biometric survey, right? The biometric survey is going to tell you where the eelgrass is. The hydrographic survey is going to tell you the tides, right? The depth. Those two pieces of information are what's going to be required for part of the COP, but you're not going to change anything outside of this. So, like, the reason I'm saying we reuse everything we already have is because you can't use anything different. It has to be off the original.
But this motion just says the feasibility part is to get a survey and a plan. It doesn't say that we have to create a new plan. We can just leverage that same plan if needed, if it comes to that.
And any consultant work their salt would have that as one of their goals is to use.
To try to reuse and save, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I get what you're saying now, Mike, but yes, we need a new survey. I think we all are there. This plan may or may not be reused, but we're not signing off the request right now. We're just saying, let's get the data. Once we have that data, whoever does the survey is going to say, hey, we can use this plan, or no, we can't use that plan. That's the way I understand it. So this motion is just to get us going forward. It's not saying that we're going to create a new plan.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying maybe I'm reading into it too much.
You know what you're basically saying the same thing John said. End of story. You're in agreement.
I'm not arguing. You guys everything thinks I'm arguing everything. I'm just giving you a perspective. I've been dealing with this permitting agency for 14 years. I've done several of these structures. Yeah, what do you do? The thing is I know what I'm doing. So forgive me for being a little overbearing or offering my opinion, because Steve, I've done it, and I know you've done it too. What
Okay,
can you do, right?
let's stop the back and forth. Okay, so let's go back a step, and let's just examine the RFP. In the number 3, or in Part E, we approved going out for an RFP. Request for proposals mean we go out to the public world.
Yep.
Coastline is just one of the vendors. We could get discount vendors, we could get high price vendors. When we went out for other RFPs, it was pretty evident that the scope of costs are all over the place. If I was a smart businessman running an engineering firm and I was looking at a redredge, and there are plenty of smart engineering firms out there, and they took the time to look at what was available from our archives of what they thought, and if they're experts in a COP process or a full permit process, they would be competitive to reuse and expect to reuse as much data. If they didn't expect to reuse all the data, it would be broken out in an hourly cost estimate, that there's some hourly costs. From my view of the previous document, the feasibility portion of our last RFP was a fixed fee. In this case, the fixed fee was, I thought, rather reasonable.
And the fixed fee would be less because it's so much smaller project.
It's a smaller project, and that's why we get competition. Competition will drive the cost down. The second part, the design and the permitting, was done on an hourly cost basis based upon the hourly billing rates of the different people that are assigned to do it. It's very hard to put a fixed fee on design and permitting because of the consultations with the agencies may or may not come together in a timely fashion. That's precisely why I recognize the fact that we couldn't possibly at the HMC fund design and permitting based upon runaway hourly costs, if that's what occurred, or unknown hourly costs. I won't use the word runaway. So we are looking for a fixed fee kind of feasibility study. If there are hopefully a lot of vendors that are competitive for this RFP, they will recognize that and give us a good price, that there's existing data. Go ahead.
I think what you say is 100% right. I would add, and I think what Steve said earlier is right, we have RFPs on file for the last project.
Right.
Those RFPs, for the most part, are going to be similar to the RFPs that are going to be written for this project. Need some modification? That could very easily be done. Within the RFP, which is the key to the whole thing, I think we have to make it very clear to the bidders that A, we need a new survey. B, we need a feasibility study and engineering plan which should follow the previous plan. As a matter of fact, mandate that it follow the previous plan, or that they take the time to evaluate the previous plan in an effort to mitigate costs, and then come up with the final number. I disagree a little bit with the fact that you're leaving the engineering fee open-ended and on an hourly basis. I think if these guys are professional enough, they know what it takes to get a COP through that has existing plans, and they need to put a price down. If you do a cost plus, it always costs more.
One thing that's important to understand is all the line work, I'm going to call it the drafting, that was done on the previous plan, that was done by Coastline. The town doesn't hold those CAD files to modify or make changes to those files. So any other person that's going to want to go and bid on this, we really want to put our feet down on Coastline and ask them to turn over the CAD files that are related to this project.
Now that may be a problem because engineering drawings and design
Hear me out.
belong to the firm that that does them.
However, when it goes out to bid under an RFP, you could put in the criteria for the RFP that the town owns the CAD files. You funded them. The town previously paid for these CAD files when they paid for the material, right?
Did we get it in hard copy or in CAD?
No, they would come in paper. They usually don't turn those over unless people ask.
He'll answer for me. He knows what I said.
Okay, so did they, Steve? Did you get a CAD file?
They made electronic files available to us.
Electronic PDF copies, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking about
No,
CAD
they were
files.
not CADs.
Correct. So you can't make a change of a document that's a PDF. CAD files are specific to engineers. They're what they do to drafting.
And
right?
any engineering firm worth their salt is not
But
going
you
to give
could
up their CAD
scan,
files.
you
Well,
could,
that's my point, is that
you could scan the plans, which we have, into a CAD program.
Okay, so you're saying that we need to either buy or obtain the CAD file.
well, we've already paid for them.
Doesn't mean we got them.
No, we don't have them. That, I know we don't, because they don't readily turn them over.
That's not the case. An engineering firm is not obligated to give you their CAD files ever.
They are if they want to work for you.
Well, you can make
That's
that
not an
a condition of employment, but
What I'm saying is
they're still going to own them.
you can.
And the reason they do that, by the way, is so that you don't take those files and give it to another engineer and say, here, do the job for 1/4 of the price, this guy's going to do it, we'll use his plan. That is called professional liability.
No, let me explain something else.
Okay, so
When
what?
somebody comes to you and asks you for proprietary information,
It's not proprietary. You paid for it.
we did not pay for the CAD files.
No.
We paid for the prints.
I'm not right here. Listen, just hear me now, all right? If we have to go through this process again, if you have access to the CAD files, you're going to save thousands of dollars. It's plain and simple. It's just what it is.
I dispute that.
That's fine. You can dispute
Oh,
it.
okay. What is done is done.
I know that. What I'm
Wait,
saying is,
but
what
maybe
does
you
it
want-
matter for this vote?
It doesn't have anything to bear on this vote. It says this is a feasibility, phase 1 feasibility, hydrographic survey conceptual plan. This is, as written here, it says, get us to the point of the conceptual plan and in the RFP we'll say you have to use as much as the pre-existing data that is valid as possible. The town, the HMC and town will review the RFP proposals prior to the award of the contract, so we haven't spent any money yet. The HMC may, if necessary, make a commitment, vote, not tonight, but then, at that time, to fund that phase feasibility. It is not the intention of the HMC to fund phases 2, 3 of the HMC with HMC funding. That's what we're voting on. Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to vote as
Second.
motion as
Okay.
written.
Chris, I'll give the motion to Chris. I will give the second to Jeff. Mikey. We
meeting minutes, we show them here.
are voting on item number 4. We're saying that we intend with over a heart attack from Mr. Harris here, but we use our HMC funds to pay for that feasibility study.
Well, how can you have the motion? I realize you have it separate, but it shouldn't be up to, typically when you fund something, the motion includes an amount up to X dollars.
I think we'll decide that when we get those quotes, that's when we're gonna make a vote, for here's at that time to fund the first phase. So we'll determine if that funding is available when this comes around, or we want to spend it.
To your point, Chris, and it's a good point, is that our records of this meeting are public records. If we put a number in there that we're willing to spend, it might very well be the number you see on our
The quote's gonna come back.
and conversely, if the number exceeds the entire treasury that we have at hand, there's no way we can vote and accept that. And certain members of the commission, and it'll be their prerogative that time to say, I'm willing to spend X amount of dollars, I'm unwilling to spend too many dollars. And if we think it's exorbitant, usury, or crazy, we won't vote, I mean, that'll be the discussion around the table. We'll either vote it up or vote it down.
there.
The vote is,
Yep.
we'll vote at the time, we'll vote at the time when we see the number. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. I'm going to call the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All in favor. So noted. Okay, lastly, RFP preparation. The HMC approves X amount of funds dedicated to fund the preparation of the RFP for the 4 Mile River Navigable Waterway Study. This motion is to hire a one-time hire of a consultant to write an RFP. That was done in the past. Dredging project, it's been done for our unstarted pier project at the Halls Road. These are not costly. I'm aware of a general estimate at the time of less than a day, $75 an hour. So I'm looking at about a maximum, a cap of $500 for this item. The alternative is for us to do it ourselves. I'm not sure I want to recommend that because there are some changes necessary between what we issued an RFP for the original dredging and this dredging. I think it would be good to have a very well-versed consultant who is knowledgeable of the COP process and would recognize, and I will push the person to recognize synergies in our RFP. And those synergies may be able to save us money in the long run by having an accurate RFP versus one that's been...
Does your $500 guesstimate include the consultant reviewing the previous plans? Because that could add some time to the process. I'm just wondering.
No, this is just for the RFP.
Right. No, I understand.
Jeff Stedman wrote the previous RFP, and if he's got the time and availability, I think John's estimate of about $500 is pretty accurate. He would be the ideal person to do it because he wrote the first one. He's familiar with it, and he would have no problem modifying it to meet this situation.
So you don't think that would raise the cost any by having to look at the past one as well?
Yeah.
This familiarity.
He wrote it.
Yeah, that's okay.
And even if it was somebody different, they would still have that available, and if they're familiar with writing RFPs,
Sure.
I don't think the cost would be much more than if Jeff did. Jeff would be the most economical.
And just so the reason I brought that up is because you just said previously that we don't want to put a dollar figure in the last motion. I'm not sure we want to put a dollar figure in this motion.
Well, this isn't this is the person who writes the RFP. This isn't an RFP. Professional engineering services under a day for $75 an hour are very reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here and make sure.
I don't think we're wasting money doing this. I think there can be some value and synergy down the road.
All I was trying to get at was, do we want to put the right number in there? So if it's 500, great. If it's 1,000, great. We don't want to pin ourselves down.
No, we don't want to pin ourselves down, but I think the...
Well, you could seek a price and then bring it back to the commission for a vote. Make a phone call and say...
No, I got the phone call this afternoon. These numbers are not out of thin air. This is stuff that I was told verbally over the phone. 5 to 8 hours, less than a day, at $75 billing rate.
Sounds reasonable.
What's your pleasure?
Mike, make a motion, Mike.
Can we make a motion
to accept?
I'd like to second with a comment, though. If we can clarify the number. If we're going to put 500 in there.
I'm going to put 500 on my copy.
500, yeah, good idea.
Okay. The motion that Mike is making is the for RFP preparation. The HMC approves $500 funds dedicated to the fund to fund the preparation of the RFP for the 4 Mile River navigable water study. I want to just that's the motion. When we say navigable water study, we're talking about the RFP defining the steps of feasibility, the design, and the permit. We're talking about the RFP that we're issuing on item number 3. It's the whole RFP. Okay. All right. Any more discussion? I'll call the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Okay. And that was motion was made by Mike and seconded by Tom. Project coordination actions. Last item on the agenda. The coordination with the Connecticut Port Authority, I continue to have that relationship with Joe Salvatore, and I expect to keep in touch with him as frequently and as often as possible. I believe there is some positive news in his willingness to look at reimbursement kind of scenarios for going down the road if they accept the project. I'm tempered that by their administrative woes at the Connecticut Port Authority to get things done, and realize that I think that the condition of that agency is hampering their ability to function normally. So that's going forward. Secondly, the coordination with Jeff Stedman has begun. There is a distinct possibility he may or may not be able to find time to do the RFP. However, I will endeavor to pick his brain and work with him and get to the point of getting something going in that front with himself, and if need be somebody else, but certainly abiding by whatever funds was made in the motion and not exceeding that. Lastly, there is a certain amount of coordination taking place that it does not involve our committee between the DEP and the Connecticut Port Authority on a lot of projects. So I think it's fair to say there is dialogue back and forth. So there is coordination. There was some further coordination issued by the Army Corps of Engineers that assigned us this project a personal contact to come to play in the second phase, which is the design engineering phase of soil sedimentation and sampling. There is some good news in that arena, is that if sediment size, and I forgot to bring it, and I had it in my other vehicle, but sediment size, as you all know, the larger the sediment, meaning sand of large grains, holds less pollution in sand than in muck, than in silt, and in the sticky stuff. So the Corps of Army Engineers has sent us a checkoff sheet, and I have some here, and they did assign us a person. One of the possible upticks of this project would be beneficial upland use, reuse of the sediment, and obviously that's a goal we're pursuing. That would really, would, I think, save costs. And depending whether or not we propose the conceptual plan that is approved proposes solely dredge below the bridge, or includes dredging above the bridge, and therefore there might have to be 2 different deposition plans. One deposition if they find pollution, one deposition if they don't find pollution. So there are some necessary steps there in coordination. The coordination with the Army Corps doesn't start at this phase, but it starts later on. And
they will probably call for a new soil sample grid and retesting the soils. Depending on what we propose. I mean,
I was able to utilize that test results in 2016, just 3 months ago.
so hopefully we find another synergy. Those coordination talks will be ultimately very important. Anything else?
I have a question. I know that at the beginning of this conversation, going back to our last meeting, when Mike brought this to light, there was some discussion with the town about getting involved. My understanding has always been that this town has a rainy day fund or something. Is there any, because this project would potentially benefit businesses located in the town of Old Lyme, would the town of Old Lyme be able to kick in some money on this? I don't know the political, back and forth too well. I'm asking you guys for your.
Introduce yourself.
Chris Kirk.
Oh, Chris Kirk.
It could, yes, there are, we have a surplus, and if you guys run short of your money, I don't know how much you guys have, what's your balance in your accounts? I don't know.
No, we have approximately 27,000 to spend on the feasibility, and
Well, not for the
We
whole.
have 20,000 in the treasury. You're gonna spend the whole.
oh wait a minute, I'll speak to the treasurer. No.
Just save me
no.
5
No, he asked the question. I asked the question.
You have some money in the account.
Yes.
But this thing, the way I was presented, the Board of Selectmen, is we're just trying to reopen up and use the grant money that's already there.
Right.
So the scope of the project is not going to change. Nothing's going to change. We just want to either fix what filled in or repair that wasn't taken care of. And there's, what was it, like $250,000?
Right. And I guess my question is, if those grants were not available,
Yes.
would the town ever consider?
You can go to, come to the board with a presentation, say, and you'd have to have all your figures ready, and the town loves to find grant money and go from there. But right now, there's this little money nest egg.
Sure. No,
that's what we're trying to grab.
Yeah.
If that doesn't happen, well, then we're going to go to a whole different story. So, but can it happen? Yes, it's possible.
Yeah.
Because it will benefit the town. It benefits the state too, so. And it's much needed for our commerce down the river.
Sure.
But yes, it is a possibility. Can I guarantee that? No.
Wait, you got the tape recorder on.
Well, that would be over $20,000. So it would have to go to a town vote. Unless you put it in a budget for next year's budget, and then it would go through the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and put it in their budget for next season.
Capital expense.
Like a capital expense, yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
And then that money would not be available until July of 2022.
Correct, July 1st.
And we'd be outside the dredging
Right,
now.
exactly.
It's a time frame where you're allowed to dredge.
Your best aspect is trying to get this money.
Yeah, the dredging window is October through April.
You can get an extension.
You can?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, the Army Corps' dredging window closes January 20th. DEP's closes April 1st. You'd think they would run concurrent, but they don't. So I had to get an extension from Army Corps to be able to dredge up until April 1st.
I think in that location,
They'll allow it.
it's pretty likely they would allow an extension.
An interesting fact that surfaces has nothing to do with this conversation, and I'll keep it short. Army Corps is behind in their funding of dredging projects of federal magnitude, and there's plenty of concern there that the federal waterways are not in good shape.
Oh yeah, sure enough.
And that in certain cases, and I'm not sure of this fact, and it's not a fact because I'm not sure of it, but in case the Corps of Army Engineers can't prepare their job, it might require state funding to do those jobs if they're considered in certain locations desirable. So.
Well, it's my contention.
Thank you for telling me.
Thank you for answering my question. No problem. There you go. Have a good one, guys. Take care.
John, the feds, I thought the dredging was, for the Army Corps, there was a lot of money. They may not have it yet. I thought they voted a lot of money for them.
I think they did.
To that point, Sloan, is the coastline is actively pursuing only federal. They're not even getting involved in local municipality
Because of that?
because they want to go after all the federal money.
Yeah, right.
He's like, we don't really do this. We're focusing on federal dredging because there's so much of it going on.
Yeah. Just to clarify, the reason we're at the Connecticut Port Authority because this is a non-federal river.
Yeah. No buoys. There's no buoys or anything, right? Yeah.
This is non-federal. This is why we're seeing, and the Corps isn't going to fund this because it's not a federal waterway.
Right.
So that's why we're at with the state.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You don't think it's advisable to put Amtrak on notice?
I do, personally. It's a long shot, but
what does on notice mean?
Well, let them know that they could be responsible for our problem.
Wait till you see the letter from their lawyer after you say that.
I mean, I agree with Eric. It can't hurt.
When did that
phone
bring
call.
up?
I mean, you can shrug your shoulders like it's no big deal, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes people can get to the front of the line. You never know.
Sometimes it's cheaper to pay than to fight.
Yeah. It doesn't work for towns, though, I don't think.
But it doesn't hurt to ask. I mean,
Don't you think that they're a big part of the problem?
they absolutely are.
And that bridge is always going to be there, so this is going to be a reoccurring problem.
Probably would be a recurring problem with the bridge there or not, given the situation with the two land masses and the natural shallowness of that water.
No, I don't agree with. Okay.
Well, Rocky Neck and Point of Woods are on either side of this bay. So didn't the sand come in from the ocean?
Where's the sand from?
Where'd the sand come from?
I would say that the sand came in from the ocean, but it's piled up where it is because there's a
Retaining wall is
barrier.
built out. They built the retaining wall.
And
across
they
the
argue
river.
the
Sand comes in and sand goes out. Every year, Griswold Point, the sandbar changes over there. Okay, it comes in, it goes out. But where the bridge is, it acts like a backstop for everything. And the sand comes in and then it piles up, but it can't go out.
It doesn't get washed.
It doesn't get the tidal flow because of the restriction of the bridge. The bridge is only XYZ wide, right? Well, back in the day, it wasn't there at all. It was a tidal marsh with a wraparound beach, right? So when the railroad came through, they built a jetty, in essence, across the river that's causing that to shoal.
Just as a point to think about.
And the design of the bridge, that's what they call a camelback bridge.
Okay. When was that bridge built?
I
Didn't the railroad go through in 1903 with the other passenger bridge?
But it was a different style of
It
bridge.
could have been a trestle type setup.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
I mean, it looks fairly new in a way. When
And,
you look at
and
the
I know in
geology.
the last 15 years they've repaired it,
They have definitely done maintenance, yeah.
and they do maintenance on it constantly because my office is right alongside the tracks.
Nothing, but there's another point of consideration. If you bring Amtrak into it, you may just put an anchor out on the whole project.
That's true,
And
too.
they may want to argue it for years, and you may never get anything done.
Listen, I was just making a suggestion.
No, I'm just saying
I
you have to.
agree on that.
You can look at both of
Yeah.
the sides.
Well, maybe you as a marina owner.
You'll see.
should send a letter.
Here's your fire department letter, by the way. Submit it to the record for you. Well, it didn't make it to it before. You can pass that down.
I just look at the whole thing that the commission went through the whole phase of doing the project the first time, and we see that it's failed. I ultimately believe that if we go through this again, 6 years from now,
Of course
6
it is.
years
For sure.
from the, we're going to be up against it.
But that's inevitable. I mean, look at the Connecticut River. A case in point where I keep my boat. Every 2 or 3 years they have to dredge. Right now, I back into my slip and I'm at low tide. I'm kicking up all sorts of mud. It just builds up. It's a natural occurrence. There's nothing you can do about it except dredge periodically.
We'll save the commission if we as a commission get on top of making sure we're paying attention to the expiration of our permits. We can apply for extensions. There's no limit on the amount of extensions they'll offer. So for instance, like this COP, our last structure spill and dredge permit expired last year. We could have filed an extension and that permit would have been able to stay open and we wouldn't even be having this discussion because the permit would be valid and current. Follow me?
Are you talking about the permit to do that project?
Yeah, so like this permit that was issued 2015. And here's Sue Bailey's copy right here. So yeah, 2015. June 15, 2015 is the Department of Army. So if we got to the Department of Army before the set expiration date of this permit and asked and requested an extension, the permit would still be open and valid to where we would be able to go out to bid and dredge right away without having to go through all this paperwork.
Even if it was already executed?
Yes. Yep, the permit doesn't
But
close.
that's only Army Corps, right?
No, well, Army Corps DEP, these are both permits, right? Both of these entities have the ability
Extend both?
of filing extensions.
We'd still have the problem of funding.
Correct, but we wouldn't be having the discussions of having to go pay for a hydrographic survey or all this other. I mean, ultimately, we'd want the hydrographic survey anyway, but you wouldn't have all these other steps that are in line for the COP. You wouldn't be reapplying with consultants. It's just an updated hydrographic survey.
So it's a lesson learned for the committee.
For sure.
You know, that we should keep our eyes on.
Well, now it's too late now for Black Hall, but I'm saying if any other permitting goes forward, I think it's in the town's best interest, and you might laugh at me for the professional etiquette of the engineers, but I own my CAD files for all my projects because I put it as a requirement. If you're going to work for me and I'm going to pay that time for that person to sit there and draft all this line work, I want the ability of taking that file and modifying it to my modifications as conditions change.
Well, that's a given. If you up front.
Correct, that's what I'm saying. So
you're going to buy the CAD files, then you own the CAD files. What you don't own, and what you can't do, is take those CAD
Correct.
files and give it to another engineer.
I agree.
And say, design this.
Correct, but what you can do is take all that line work. So for instance, you can take the line work that they pay the drafter to do, but you pay the drafter to do. And I'm only having
You can modify it.
And so like he's saying, you can scan it. Like it doesn't work that easy. If you have all the CAD drawing, there's thousands of hours involved in creating that data.
No, they got to be in CAD to start off with.
Bob, would you advise that we do that in the future?
Yeah. You want the CAD files as your permanent record.
So in the CAD files, you can have the engineering company remove all of their professional stamps in relation to their organization on the raw file itself. They're going to look at it like you got 10 heads, but if you're paying the bills, they're going to turn it over because they want the
Why did I say copyright?
Correction. You'll get the CAD file that is stamped. You can't reissue those CAD files with the same stamped engineer or architect.
Correct. What I'm saying is if the engineer itself removes any indication of their company and just leaves the raw line work, okay, the raw drawings, less.
Wouldn't the regulatory agency want to see a stamped drawing?
You're going to submit a stamped drawing, but you're taking that file, giving it to your new engineer. He's putting it in his computer system. He's uploading it, and this whole map, less the stamp, pulls up onto their file. So then you can take your hydrographic survey and make the modifications without having to do all this line work, right? All these outlays of the marina, and the coastal sightline, and the wetland.
I'm not sure you can take that CAD drawing as is and have another engineer stamp it.
Yeah.
That's like me saying, okay, Mr. Architect, design a building for me.
Well, that's what coastline did.
A year later I say, thanks for the design, I want the CAD drawings, but we don't have enough money to build it. 5 years later, I take those plans out and I give it to another architect and say, put your stamp on it. That's grounds for a lawsuit.
No, they're going to make their modifications because you have the
You have to change them to a certain.
I agree, but I'm only telling you because I've done it. That's the only reason I'm saying.
You may have done it.
No, I'm saying. No, it wasn't illegal. I had the coastline turned over to someone else.
I got sued for doing something like that.
Yes, if you're making representations that company's work is the work, but you're not. It's somebody else is doing the legwork. You can't hurt to have the conversation.
Well, yeah, I can understand your concern. We can certainly put a caveat in the RFP to obtain CAD.
it's just worth it. You have to.
Yes, I mean, they're worth having.
Well, this is new information that we should have probably let out of the permit lapse without an extension.
For sure.
But, you know, nobody blew the alarm and whistle last year, and that was a critical year, I suppose.
It was, yeah.
That, you know, we were all here. We didn't hear that argument. So, you know, I think logical minds would have prevailed at the time if we were aware.
Yeah, but not to be mean or anything. The last time when that was dredged, Ned and Steve really took total control of that project. So they really didn't disclose a lot of that kind of information.
Ned basically took it over and did all the work.
Right.
Yeah. And somehow
We never got.
he got that funding
Yes.
up front.
I've heard that.
And
He was instrumental.
yeah.
Exactly right.
So what the problem is, a commission, I think that we need to improve as a commission altogether, not just focusing on 4 Mile River, but the Black Hall River, the Lieutenant. All of our waterways, we got to pay closer attention. Whether that's our harbor management's going out and testing to see the depths of the water, so we're paying attention and we're on top of it, instead of waiting for the alarm bells to go off and someone else is bringing it to us. I don't know, that's just my personal opinion. Like a harbor management commission, I would think that that's something that we should do, or be looking at all of our coastal resources in their entirety and how we can improve them and maintain them, and any permits that the town gets, we're paying attention to the deadlines and the opportunities for extension, so we don't have to get in this position of creating stuff all over again.
Well, I would be very concerned that if we next month get a call from a different location and say, hey, we've got a problem here, because then we're in that situation where we haven't diagnosed any problems. Right now, the same goes for the Connecticut River. I don't think anybody's diagnosing the fact that there's lots of areas of the Connecticut, all the way up and down, being filled in. It's silting in terribly.
You know, yeah, I mean, he's experiencing it right now. His family just had to get a dredge permit to fix
That area there, Cabs Island, Goose Island, Lord's Cove, Tandem Hig Landing, you name it. They're all filling in. And upstream too. And above Hamburg Cove, that stretch over there by the shoal, the bar there is very filled in around that island, Southeast Asia, and that other island, the house on it.
Brockway?
It'd be interesting to have Ned in here, maybe if he'd ever volunteer.
I was going to say we should maybe hire him as a consultant.
Because
Ned's health was an issue.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I tried to reach him and I didn't get a reply, and I'm very concerned that he might not be a good enough health.
do anyone know Adam Burrows? He used to be the principal here in town for the elementary school.
Yeah, I know. Or not.
He's the assistant superintendent up in like a different town. He's really good at writing grants. He stopped down in the marina and talked to me, and he's the one that told me he was actually trying to get me to meet up with Ned. He thought we could share some ideas about trying to secure future funding for dredging projects. But I know he's like instrumental at writing tons of grants and finding free money.
Okay. We can continue the dialogue, but I'd like to get it. Some people have to meet, and I appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. It was very cooperative, and I'm very thankful that you all recognized the urgency of the meeting and made your time to get here and vote with us. I really appreciate the support of these unanimous votes, and thank you. And those are your first votes cast, Sloan, so those are... You'll be a foundation going forward. Okay, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Did you get it?
So moved. Tom Meyer is
That
second.
the bank rejected it.
In fact, I got to talk.
Okay, thank you, Bob. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.
I'm going to tell you what happened.
It sounded like they did clear it to remand.
They didn't clear it.